Buried alive inside Pelican Bay, America's prison of no return. The day the lights died. The sound hits first. A low hum, then silence. And then, darkness. Inside Pelican Bay's security housing unit, the SHU, the lights had never gone out before. Not once. But tonight something had gone wrong. A guard named Officer Jacobs stood in the control booth staring at the monitor wall as every screen turned black. Inmates screamed down the tier. Doors clanked. Metal echoed. And deep inside cell C-108, a man named Marcus Vega whispered the same words over and over again. They finally buried me alive. He wasn't exaggerating. For Marcus, this wasn't just solitary confinement. This was a burial with a heartbeat. The air in his cell was thick. He pressed his hand against the wall. It felt warm, like the prison itself was breathing. No one came. No voices. No light. Just the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears. And in that moment, Pelican Bay became more than a prison. It became a tomb. But how did Marcus end up here? How does a man go from a street corner in Los Angeles to being buried alive in a box built by the state of California? That's the story we're about to tell. The making of a ghost. Marcus Vega wasn't born a monster. He was born in Boyle Heights, a neighborhood where survival meant choosing sides before you even knew what sides meant. By age 13, he was already running errands for older gang members, carrying packages, relaying messages, learning silence. By 17, he carried something heavier, a .38 revolver. And by 19, one mistake would seal his fate. It happened outside a liquor store in 1997. A rival crew pulled up, insults flew, someone reached for a weapon, and Marcus fired first. He didn't know the man he shot was an off-duty corrections officer. When they caught him, the court called it capital murder. He called it a moment. The state called it life without parole. And just like that, Marcus Vega disappeared into California's darkest hole, Pelican Bay State Prison. Welcome to the end of the world. The bus ride north took 10 hours. Through mountains, forests, and fog so thick it swallowed the sun. When the gates finally opened, Pelican Bay looked less like a prison and more like a fortress built to keep hell inside. Guards didn't shout here, they whispered commands as if even their own voices might echo wrong. Every inmate got a number. Every number had a cell. Every cell was 8 feet by 10. That's smaller than an average bathroom. Marcus's new home had no windows, no clocks, no sound except for air vents hissing. The meals came through a slot. The world existed only in memory. And Pelican Bay had a rule. You can leave your cell, but you'll never leave the SHU. Most inmates spent 22 hours a day alone. Marcus spent 23. When he spoke, it was to himself. When he slept, it was to the sound of his heartbeat against concrete. The Green Wall. To survive Pelican Bay, you learned about the Green Wall. Not a structure, but a code. A code among guards who protected their own no matter what. Rumor said if an inmate spoke out, they'd find themselves misplaced, in the wrong yard at the wrong time with the wrong people. Marcus learned to keep quiet. But his silence made him dangerous. He started writing complaints, notes, letters, calling out abuse, food tampering, beatings that no one recorded. He sent them to journalists, lawyers, anyone who might listen. And that's when the warnings began. Stop writing. Keep your head down. You don't want to disappear in here. He ignored them. And 3 weeks later his lights went out. The burial begins. That night the power cut wasn't an accident. Not for Marcus. The other cells flickered back on. It stayed black. He banged on the door, yelled for help, but only the walls answered. No guards. No sound. Just a faint hum behind the concrete. Hours turned into days. He stopped keeping track after 5. His food tray stopped coming. Water barely dripped from the sink. The smell of mold grew thick. He tried to scream again, but his voice was gone. Some say it was punishment. Some say it was a test, to see how long a man could last when the world pretended he didn't exist. For Marcus Vega, it was proof that Pelican Bay wasn't just a prison. It was a graveyard where the living are buried one cell at a time. And just when he thought the silence would kill him, he heard a sound. A key turning. The door clicked. And a voice whispered from the dark. You should have stayed quiet, Vega. The revenge of the forgotten. The door opened just wide enough for a shadow to slip in. Marcus squinted through the darkness, but his eyes were so used to black that even the guard's flashlight felt like a blade. Back up, the voice ordered. It was Officer Ramirez, a man Marcus had seen only through the slot in his door, a face behind mirrored sunglasses. But tonight Ramirez wasn't wearing glasses. His eyes were cold and clear. He tossed something onto the floor, a small brown bag. It slid across the concrete and stopped near Marcus's bare feet. "Eat," Ramirez said. Marcus didn't move. He hadn't eaten in 3 days, but he'd learned that food could mean punishment, not mercy. Ramirez tilted his head, watching him like a scientist watching an experiment. Then he said something Marcus would never forget. "This is what happens to men who think the world can hear them." The flashlight clicked off. The door slammed shut. And Marcus was buried again. The Whisper Network. Inside Pelican Bay, words traveled faster than air. Even men sealed in concrete boxes had ways to talk. They tapped on pipes, scraped codes into walls, flushed notes through toilets that led to the same plumbing lines. A day after the blackout, Marcus started hearing those sounds, faint taps, slow rhythms. He pressed his ear against the vent and listened. Tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. It was the old inmate code. Someone was asking if he was alive. Marcus tapped back. "I'm still here." That moment kept him breathing. He wasn't the only one in the dark. There were others, men like T-Bone, Leroy, and Ghost, each with their own story of being lost in the system. Together, through whispers in the pipes, they began to plan something no one had ever tried before in the SHU. They called it the signal. The signal. The signal wasn't an escape. It was a way to be heard. At exactly 11 p.m. on the 5th night, every man who could still move was supposed to make noise, banging, shouting, flooding their sinks, slamming trays, so that the control booth upstairs would have no choice but to notice. It wasn't rebellion, it was existence. And Marcus was chosen to start it. When the time came, he waited, counting in his head. 10:59 p.m. The air was still. Then at 11 sharp, bang. Marcus slammed his fists into the steel door. The sound echoed like thunder. Then another cell joined in. And another. And another. Soon the SHU sounded like an earthquake trapped in metal. For the first time in years, the buried men made the prison shake. But above them, something else stirred, the green wall. The retaliation. The noise lasted only 6 minutes before the alarm screamed. Floodlights came on, blinding. Boots thundered down the tier. Orders were shouted, but no one could hear words anymore, just rage. Officers in riot gear moved in, shields up, batons ready. One by one, cells were opened. Men were dragged out, cuffed, pepper sprayed, slammed to the ground. When they reached Marcus's cell, Ramirez was leading the team. He didn't use a word. He just pointed. The guards stormed in. Marcus didn't fight. He couldn't. They pinned him, zip-tied his wrists, and shoved a black hood over his head. As they dragged him down the hall, the other inmates went silent. It was as if the whole building held its breath. Marcus could hear one of them whisper through a vent as he passed. "Stay strong, brother." Then the hallway door slammed and he was gone. The hole within the hole. They called it the observation room. But everyone knew it by another name. The hole within the hole. It was a hidden wing deep inside the SHU, used for special management. No cameras. No logbooks. No witnesses. Marcus was left inside, cuffed to a chair under a single buzzing light. Hours passed. No food. No answers. Only the faint sound of dripping water. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Ramirez, it was a new voice. A calm, female voice. "Mr. Vega, my name is Attorney Williams. You filed letters with my office. I'm here to help." Marcus couldn't believe it. Someone had actually found him. She slid a paper across the table. "You wrote about mistreatment, food deprivation, assaults. This is serious, Marcus. Do you want to testify?" He looked up, eyes hollow. "They already buried me once. You think they'll let me crawl out?" Before she could answer, a guard appeared behind her and said, "Time's up." She promised to return. But as she left, Marcus knew what would come next. Pelican Bay had a way of making hope disappear. And sure enough, that night the lights went out again. Just in his cell. The silent rebellion. Marcus sat in total darkness, listening to the air vents breathe. But this time he didn't panic. He reached into the wall crack where he'd hidden something small, a bent piece of metal from an old meal tray. He scratched 4 words into the concrete beside his bunk. "They can't bury truth." Then he started tapping again, slow, steady, defiant. Tap tap. Tap tap. Across the SHU, other inmates answered. A symphony of the forgotten. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. But it was unstoppable. That night, Pelican Bay didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a heartbeat. A heartbeat that no wall could silence. And somewhere beyond the razor wire, a lawyer was filing papers that would change everything. But the green wall was already moving to stop her. And for Marcus Vega, the war for truth had only just begun. Buried justice. The morning after the taps echoed through the SHU, Pelican Bay was unnervingly quiet. No shouting. No movement. Just the smell of bleach drifting through the vents. Something had changed. The kind of change that came right before punishment. The vanishing lawyer. 2 days passed. Attorney Williams never came back. Marcus thought maybe she'd given up, until a guard whispered through the food slot. She didn't quit. She just disappeared. Later, Marcus overheard 2 guards talking outside the control booth. Car accident, Highway 101. No survivors. You think it's connected? You didn't hear that from me. Marcus froze. His stomach sank. The only person who tried to help him was gone, erased just like the others who spoke up. He looked at the wall where he'd carved his message, "They can't bury truth." But now even truth felt like a ghost. That night the air vent rattled. A small voice whispered through. "They're coming for you, Vega. Be ready." The transfer. At dawn, Marcus was yanked out of his cell, shackled from ankles to wrists. He wasn't told where he was going. The guards didn't speak. Their eyes stayed forward. They led him through corridors few inmates ever saw, past sealed doors and silent hallways with no numbers. The walls were freshly painted, hiding stains that never really left. When they reached the end, Marcus realized this wasn't a normal unit. This was D Block, a section officially closed since 2005. But now it was alive again. Inside were 6 other men, faces he recognized only by their voices through the vents. T-Bone, Leroy, Ghost, the brothers of the Silent Rebellion. Each one looked broken but breathing. They weren't alone anymore. And that made them dangerous. The experiment. 4 weeks, the men in D Block were cut off completely. No mail. No lawyers. No family contact. Only guards rotating in silence, carrying clipboards instead of batons. They began noticing patterns, strange pills mixed in with meals, lights flickering at the same hour every night, and a humming noise beneath the floor that made their heads pound. Marcus kept track by scratching marks into the wall. Day 3. Day 4. Day 5. On the 7th mark, a doctor came in. White coat. Calm tone. "You're part of a new behavioral study, Mr. Vega. We're testing the limits of isolation." Marcus laughed, dry and bitter. "You mean torture?" The doctor smiled faintly. "That word doesn't exist here." And he left. From that day on, the humming grew louder. The vents blew hot air instead of cold. Their food trays arrived late, or not at all. Some men started hallucinating. Ghost screamed for hours until his voice broke. Leroy began talking to walls that didn't talk back. Marcus wrote everything down on scraps of cardboard, hiding them behind a loose tile. Evidence. Proof. Because if he ever got out, he wanted the world to see what Pelican Bay did to men it wanted erased. The green wall strikes back. 3 months later, the warden himself came down. Warden Collins, a man built like a soldier, voice calm as ice. He stood in front of Marcus's cell and said, "We've reviewed your complaints. You're being moved back to general population." Marcus didn't trust the tone. No one earned their way out of the hole. Especially not after what he'd done. 2 guards escorted him down a narrow hall. They didn't take him to general population. They took him to the yard, empty, fenced, silent. Marcus looked around. There were no other inmates. Just Officer Ramirez waiting with that same cold stare. "This is where we end it," Ramirez said. "You think letters can save you? You think tapping makes you a hero?" Marcus said nothing. He'd learned that silence was his last weapon. Ramirez pulled out a paper. Marcus's hidden notes, the ones from behind the tile. "You think we don't see everything? We own everything here." He tore the papers slowly, letting them fall like ashes into the dirt. Then he leaned in close. "You're not buried alive, Vega. You're buried forgotten." He turned to leave. But before the guards could drag Marcus away, a sound echoed from the tower above. A whistle. Then, alarms. The leak. Up in the control booth, an officer was on the phone, shouting. "It's all over the news. Someone leaked the tapes." For the first time, Marcus saw fear on Ramirez's face. Not rage, fear. The guards froze as the loudspeakers crackled to life. A voice from Central Command shouted through every corridor. "All units stand down. Federal investigators en route. Repeat, stand down." The green wall had been breached. Someone, somehow, had gotten Marcus's evidence out of Pelican Bay. The guards looked at each other. Ramirez backed away, muttering, "This isn't over." But Marcus only smiled for the first time in years. Because even in a place built to bury men alive, the truth had clawed its way to the surface. He looked up at the sky through the razor wire and whispered, They finally heard us. The breaking point. For the first time in decades, Pelican Bay wasn't silent. Reporters were calling. Cameras were coming. And the warden's office, once untouchable, was now under a microscope. The men who had been buried were suddenly visible. But for Marcus Vega, visibility didn't mean safety. It meant target. The world takes notice. When the story hit the news, the headline read, Pelican Bay torture chambers, whistleblower inmate speaks from the SHU. The footage showed grainy photos of cells, food trays covered in mold, and leaked memos with signatures blacked out. News anchors spoke the words that had been whispered through pipes for years: psychological abuse, illegal isolation, inhumane conditions. Protesters gathered outside the prison gates holding signs. Shut down the SHU. The green wall must fall. Burying the living is not justice. Families of inmates spoke out, demanding answers. Politicians promised investigations. Even the governor's office issued a statement, cautious, rehearsed, but still a crack in the armor. And for a moment, the buried men believed freedom might finally be real. But inside the walls, the atmosphere turned cold. Guards whispered names. Doors closed earlier. Meals arrived late. And the lights began to flicker again. The trap. 3 nights after the news broke, Marcus was escorted to the warden's office. No warning. No explanation. The room was clean, quiet, and cold. Warden Collins sat behind his desk, hands folded. Mr. Vega, he began, his voice calm, almost kind. You've caused quite the storm. I should congratulate you. Marcus didn't reply. He could see the cameras on the ceiling weren't recording. He'd learned how to tell the difference. You think the world cares, Marcus? They'll forget. They always do. In a week it'll be another headline. Another tragedy. But you'll still be here. He slid a paper across the table. Sign this statement. Say you exaggerated. Say it was a misunderstanding. Do that and you'll live to see daylight again. Marcus stared at the form. He thought about the men who'd tapped messages through pipes. He thought about the lawyer who died for this. Then he looked up and said quietly, You built a tomb. I just showed them where the bodies are. Colin's face didn't change, but his voice dropped to a whisper. Then I guess you'll die a martyr. The beating. That night, guards came for Marcus. No cuffs this time. Just fists. They dragged him into a maintenance room. No cameras, no witnesses. Each hit was deliberate, silent, professional. He fell to the floor but refused to scream. Ramirez was the last to step forward. Still think you're the voice of the buried? He hissed. We'll see if you can speak after this. He raised his baton. And then the sirens blared. All units locked down. The loudspeaker crackled. Federal agents on site. Everyone stand down immediately. The guards froze. Doors clanged. Boots thundered. Through the narrow window, Marcus saw flashlights and badges, FBI. The green wall was cracking. The investigation. Federal agents swarmed Pelican Bay. Files were seized. Guards were questioned. A full audit began, documenting years of secret transfers, falsified reports, and unrecorded incidents. Marcus was moved to the medical unit under supervision of federal marshals. For the first time in 15 years, he saw sunlight through real glass. The lead investigator, Agent Klein, sat beside his bed. You're the reason this place is being torn open, he said. You ready to testify? Marcus nodded weakly. If I don't, they'll bury the truth again. Klein hesitated. You understand what comes with that, right? These people won't stop just because there's a camera on them. Marcus's eyes hardened. They already tried to kill me. What's left to take? Klein scribbled something in his notebook. Then we'll make sure your story doesn't die in the dark. The breaking point. The hearings began in Sacramento. Former guards came forward. One by one, they confirmed what Marcus had written. The beatings, the starvation, the blackouts, all real. A few broke down crying on the stand. Others stayed silent, afraid of retaliation. The media called it the Pelican Bay revelation. But inside the prison, retaliation didn't end. One night, a fire alarm went off in the medical unit. Sprinklers rained water across the floor. In the chaos, someone shut off the lights. A nurse screamed. A tray crashed. When the lights came back on, Marcus was gone. His bed was empty. The prison of no return. When the lights came back on, Marcus Vega was gone. No one saw him leave. No one saw who took him. And the cameras, every single one, had mysteriously gone dark for exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes that would change everything. The vanishing. At 2:17 a.m., Nurse Wallace screamed for help. The hallway lights flickered, and the power rebooted just long enough for her to see Marcus's hospital wristband on the floor, soaked in water and blood. Federal agents swarmed the medical ward within minutes, but there was nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, no sign of forced entry. Agent Klein slammed his fist against the wall. He couldn't have just disappeared. But deep down he already knew. At Pelican Bay, people didn't just vanish. They were erased. The warden called it a transfer. The file said relocation. But no one, not the marshals, not the feds, not even the governor, could find where Marcus Vega had gone. It was as if the man who had shaken the system was swallowed by it. The official story. 2 days later, the prison released a statement. Inmate Marcus Vega was moved for his own safety after credible threats from other inmates. We continue to cooperate with federal investigators. The word sounded calm. Too calm. Outside, the public didn't buy it. Hashtag Where is Marcus began trending on social media. Documentaries replayed his story. Civil rights lawyers demanded proof of life. But Pelican Bay stayed silent. Meanwhile, Agent Klein received a plain brown envelope at his hotel room. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. Marcus Vega. Lying on the floor of a cell. Eyes open. A bruised cheek. And on the back of the photo in black marker were 4 words. They can't bury truth. The secret wing. The photo's background wasn't the medical unit. Klein noticed something else. A marking on the wall behind Marcus. D11. But D block only had 10 cells. When Klein cross-checked the blueprints, he found a section labeled Subterranean Storage, Restricted Access. The notes beside it were classified under Psych Security Testing. He called his team. We're going underground. When they reached the old section, the walls were dripping from condensation. Rusted pipes. Dead cameras. And at the end of the hallway, a steel door with a faded stencil. D11. Klein's partner whispered. This wasn't in any record. They forced it open. Inside was a small cell, empty except for a broken cot, a bowl, and something scratched into the wall with fingernails. Still here. The blood was fresh. The return of the green wall. Before Klein could call it in, the alarms blared again. The lights flickered red. The door behind them slammed shut automatically. They were trapped. A voice crackled through the intercom, distorted but familiar. Agent Klein. You're trespassing. It was Warden Collins. I warned you. This facility runs on order. You bring chaos. And chaos doesn't survive here. Klein shouted into his radio. This isn't over, Collins. We have the evidence. The voice replied coldly. You had evidence. Now you'll join your witness. Then everything went black. The broadcast. Outside the prison, protests had grown into riots. Helicopters circled overhead. Federal agents demanded access, but the warden declared an internal lockdown, for safety. For 48 hours Pelican Bay was completely sealed. No communication in or out. Then suddenly, every news channel in America stopped mid-broadcast. A live feed appeared. It showed a dimly lit cell. A man bruised, sitting in the shadows. It was Marcus Vega. His voice was weak but steady. If you're hearing this, they failed to bury me. Pelican Bay isn't just a prison. It's a machine. It eats people. It buries truth. But I'm still alive, and I'm not alone. The camera shook. Footsteps. Yelling. The feed cut off. Every station went black. The awakening. By dawn, the entire country was talking. People demanded the prison be shut down. Congress called emergency hearings. But no one knew where Marcus was now, or if he was even still alive. Inside Pelican Bay, the lockdown continued. Inmates whispered through the vents. He's still here. They can't kill him. He's part of the walls now. And deep below the SHU in the darkness of D11, a faint tapping began. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. It was the same rhythm Marcus once used to signal life. This time though, no one could tell where it was coming from. The sound echoed through every block, every pipe, every cell. The guards froze. Even the warden listened. Because in Pelican Bay, silence was supposed to mean control. But now the silence had a voice. The echoes beneath the concrete. The taps never stopped. Every few hours, 2 beats, a pause, then 3. The pattern rolled through the ventilation shafts like a heartbeat pulsing inside the concrete. At first, the guards thought it was a prank. Then the maintenance crew swore the noise wasn't coming from any occupied tier. And when they cut power to the entire block, the sound kept going. That's when fear replaced discipline. Voices in the pipes. Officer Ramirez hadn't slept in 2 days. He sat in the control booth staring at the flickering monitors, whispering to himself. It's just echoes. Just air in the lines. But he could hear words forming in the rhythm. Soft, slow. Almost like Marcus Vega's voice. Still here, still here. He slammed his fists on the desk, killing the sound for a second. Then it returned, louder, vibrating the glass. Other officers started hearing it too. Some refused to patrol the lower levels at night. By the third day, half the staff had filed psychological distress reports. Pelican Bay wasn't just breaking inmates anymore. It was breaking its own guards. The federal return. Agent Klein came back with a federal warrant, this time backed by a full tactical unit. They weren't asking permission. They were taking control. Floodlights lit the compound as investigators swept through each corridor, photographing every cell. When they reached D Block, Klein ordered ground-penetrating scanners to be rolled in. What they found wasn't on any blueprint. Beneath the floor of the SHU were additional chambers, old concrete rooms sealed decades earlier. No doors, just welded plates. The readings showed shapes inside. Klein's voice trembled. Cut it open. When they peeled the first plate away, the smell hit them, rust, mold, and something else. Inside were archived filing cabinets stacked against the walls. Documents, tapes, photos. And on the center of the floor, carved deep into the concrete. The truth stays buried. The files. The files went back 30 years. Early test logs. Experiment notes. Entries labeled behavioral response to sensory deprivation. Each page listed inmate numbers, dates, durations. Some lasted days. Some lasted years. Marcus Vega's name appeared near the end, marked Phase 9, Active Subject. Klein flipped the page. Next to it was a still frame from a surveillance feed. Marcus in cell D11, eyes wide, mouth open mid-scream. Timestamp, 2:23 a.m., the same minute he'd vanished. At the bottom, a final line typed in red ink. Subject shows persistent cognitive activity post-containment. Klein stared at it. Post-containment? What does that even mean? His partner whispered. They're saying he's still active. After death. The rising taps. Outside, thunder rolled over the coastline. Inside, every inmate heard the taps at once. Tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. Men pounded their doors, shouting Vega's name. Some cried. Some laughed. Even those in solitary screamed back into the darkness. We hear you. The lights flickered. Control panels overloaded. Every lock in D Block clicked open for 2 seconds before emergency power sealed them again. It was chaos, controlled only by fear. Warden Collins rushed to the command center, veins bulging. Shut it down. All of it. I want power cut to the entire lower level. A technician turned pale. Sir, the system's not responding. It's running itself. Screens filled with static, then with the same repeating line of text. Still here. The broadcast returns. At 11:07 p.m., national news channels glitched again. Every feed, every station, flashed to the same live footage. This time it wasn't Marcus sitting in a cell. It was the inside of Pelican Bay's control room, streaming in real time. The cameras weren't theirs. Someone, or something, was controlling them remotely. Viewers saw guards panicking, alarms screaming, lights dying one by one. Then a low voice came through the speakers. You can bury men. You can bury truth. But you can't bury what you created. The image distorted, half static, half face. Marcus's eyes stared straight into the lens. Pelican Bay was built on silence. Now silence speaks. The feed cut. The descent. Federal teams surrounded the prison by dawn. Power was down. Communication, dead. Thermal drones picked up movement underground, but no one could identify it. Klein stood at the perimeter fence, headset crackling. We're losing contact with every unit inside. A burst of static answered. Then a whisper came through the radio. Agent Klein, this is Vega. He froze. Marcus? Where are you? The voice sounded calm, almost peaceful. I'm where they put me. I never left. Then silence. And from deep beneath the concrete, the tapping started again. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. But this time it wasn't one rhythm. It was hundreds. The collapse of the green wall. Rain hammered the razor wire. Floodlights swung wildly across the yard, turning fog into white fire. From outside the gates, Pelican Bay looked less like a prison now and more like a battlefield waiting to erupt. Federal trucks idled in the mud. Agents loaded flashlights, radios, and breaching gear. At the center of them all stood Agent Klein, soaked, silent, staring at the fortress that had already swallowed too many men. "No more ghosts," he said. "We go in. We find Vega." The breach. The team moved through the outer gate under generator light. Every corridor echoed like a tunnel. Water dripped from cracked ceilings, alarms still pulsed in the distance, slow like a dying heartbeat. Inside the control room, monitors showed static. Every speaker hissed with the same faint rhythm. Tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. Klein motioned forward. D-block first. That's where it started. When they reached the steel blast door leading to the lower levels, the hinges were fused with rust and salt. They cut through, the sparks reflecting off pools of standing water. Beyond the door lay a hallway that shouldn't exist. It sloped down, disappearing into the earth. Old signs peeled off the walls. Project Quiet Mind, authorized personnel only. Klein whispered, "What did they build down here?" "The Archive of Shadows." The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Pipes snaked across the ceiling. Numbers painted decades ago marked each junction. D12, D13, D14. At the end of the tunnel, a glass chamber waited behind bars. Inside, hundreds of dusty reels and black and white tapes labeled only with inmate numbers. A young agent played one. The screen flickered to life, showing men alone in small concrete cells, whispering, then screaming, then whispering again. Doctors in lab coats observed through one-way glass, taking notes. One tape caught everyone's attention. Vega, M. Number 49127. He sat motionless on the floor, staring at the wall. A doctor's voice said off camera. "Subject has been in full isolation for 392 consecutive days. Beginning phase 9, acoustic deprivation." The audio dropped to silence, but Vega's lips moved. No sound came out. Then, tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. Klein turned off the monitor. The rhythm echoed somewhere behind them, not from the tape but from the walls themselves. The living system. The agents followed the sound through a maintenance hatch into a huge underground chamber, part sewer, part machine. Cables, pipes, and old ventilation shafts crossed overhead like veins. A technician scanned the structure. "This isn't plumbing," he said. "These are acoustic tunnels. They carry vibration." Klein stepped closer, realizing. The heartbeat of Pelican Bay wasn't an accident. It was designed. The prison had been built to transmit sound, to make one man's isolation echo through the entire facility. And now it was echoing back. Suddenly, every speaker in their headsets burst to life at once. "You tried to silence me. You buried me alive. But I'm still here." Marcus's voice, multiplied, distorted, coming from every direction. The lights flickered, water rippled across the floor. The whole chamber began to shake. "Fall back," Klein yelled. "Everybody out, now." The collapse. As the team scrambled upward, explosions of concrete dust burst from the walls. Old supports snapped. The sound wasn't mechanical anymore, it was roaring, alive. Outside, the entire prison shuddered. Inmates screamed. Guards fled across the yard as sections of D-block caved in, one after another, like dominoes falling underground. A final tremor threw Klein against a wall. He looked up to see a flood of black water bursting through the corridor, old drainage lines exploding from the pressure. He shouted into his radio. "Evacuate. The foundation's giving way." Then just as suddenly, the motion stopped. The noise ended. The only thing left was dripping water. And one faint rhythm, far below the rubble. Tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. The revelation. By morning the rain had stopped. Smoke rose from the ruined cell blocks. Helicopters circled overhead as emergency crews poured through the wreckage. Reporters shouted questions. Officials refused to answer. Warden Collins was nowhere to be found. In the debris of the control room, Klein found a cracked drive labeled Quiet Mind, Final Phase. He handed it to a technician. The screen came to life. Text scrolled across the bottom. Final directive. Integrate subject Vega's neural pattern into the facility's acoustic feedback loop. Purpose. Permanent compliance. Klein stared, speechless. They turned him into part of the system. He looked toward the ruins of D-block, where water still pooled around broken pipes. The faint rhythm continued under his feet. Tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. Klein whispered. "He's still talking." The resurrection of the buried. For weeks, smoke still rose from the wreckage of Pelican Bay. What had once been California's fortress of silence was now a crater of twisted rebar and concrete dust. Reporters called it a structural failure. Officials called it an unfortunate accident. But everyone who had heard the sound that night, the rhythm pulsing through the ground, knew better. Aftermath. Hundreds of inmates were transferred to other state prisons. Most refused to speak. Those who did spoke of the same thing. He talks through the pipes. He tells us to remember. Vega's not dead, he's everywhere. Psychologists labeled it mass trauma hallucination. But even guards admitted to hearing the rhythm in the walls of new facilities miles away. Tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. Agent Klein sat before a Senate committee, his face hollow from sleepless nights. Senators demanded an explanation. He gave them the truth he could prove. The hidden chambers, the illegal experiments, the missing records. Then one senator asked quietly, "And Vega? Where is he now?" Klein hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't think Vega exists in a place we can reach anymore." The data leak. A month later, an anonymous upload appeared on encrypted forums, gigabytes of scanned reports, inmate logs and audio files. Each clip began with silence, then a faint heartbeat, then Marcus Vega's voice. They thought silence was control. But silence remembers. The files spread faster than officials could delete them. Whistleblowers stepped forward. Lawyers reopened old cases. Families of missing inmates began filing lawsuits. Across California, the phrase "still here" appeared spray-painted on walls, bridges, and courthouse steps. Pelican Bay had become a symbol, part ghost story, part proof of government cruelty. And Marcus Vega had become something more than a man, a warning. The survivors. Among the transferred inmates was Leroy, one of the men from D Block. He spent his days in a psychiatric ward, refusing to speak until a reporter visited. When asked what really happened that night, he whispered, "You can't kill an echo. You can only make it louder." He lifted his sleeve. Carved into his arm, healed into a scar, were the words, "Still here." Inmates in other facilities began carving or tattooing the same phrase. Some tapped it on their cell doors. Some whispered it during count time. Guards wrote reports calling it a dangerous new gang code. But it wasn't a gang. It was a message. The warden's return. 6 months after the collapse, a fisherman near Crescent City reported a body washed ashore. It was Warden Collins. No ID, but the uniform told the story. Cause of death, drowning. Mouth and lungs filled with seawater, but there was one strange detail. Inside his throat, lodged deep near the vocal cords, investigators found concrete dust. Someone, or something, had filled his last breath with Pelican Bay itself. Agent Klein watched the report on TV, gripping a coffee cup until it cracked. He turned off the screen. From the pipes behind the wall, he heard it again. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. He whispered, "I hear you, Marcus." The decision. Behind closed doors, state officials faced a choice. Shut Pelican Bay down completely, or rebuild it. Billions were on the line. Reputation, politics, pride. A leaked recording from one of those meetings captured the governor's voice. "If we admit what happened, we admit we lost control. Rebuild it. Rename it. And make sure this never happens again." Plans for a new high-security rehabilitation facility were drafted within weeks. Same location. New name. Different paint. But when construction crews arrived, their drills jammed. Their tools failed. And from deep below the concrete pit, they swore they heard something moving. Tap tap, pause, tap tap tap. The foreman quit the next day. The project stalled. No one went near the site again. The awakening. Late one night, a maintenance worker at a nearby power station picked up a strange frequency through his headset, a repeating Morse-like pattern. When decoded, it formed 4 words. "They can't bury truth." And under it, faint but unmistakable, "Still here." The transmission was traced to a dead circuit beneath Pelican Bay, an area destroyed in the collapse. No equipment remained there. No power source. Just silence, and the echo that refused to die. The worker tried to shut it off. But the more he adjusted the signal, the louder it became, spreading into the emergency broadcast band, the local radio, even car stereos parked along Highway 101. Across the coastline, people driving through the fog heard it on every frequency. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. Some turned the radios off. Others kept listening, claiming they could hear words forming beneath the static. "I'm still here." Echoes of the machine. Fog rolled in from the Pacific, curling over the cliffs like breath from something ancient. Where Pelican Bay once stood, there was nothing but a crater of gray dust and broken rebar. But at night, locals swore they could still see lights flicker under the surface, like a heartbeat trying to come back. Agent Klein parked his car by the old access road. The radio on his dashboard clicked even though it was off. Tap tap, pause, Tap tap tap. He whispered. All right, Marcus. One last time. He stepped into the fog. Returned to the ruins. The gate was gone, the sign rusted and half buried. Every step Klein took echoed against unseen walls. He carried only a flashlight, a recorder, and the small drive labeled Quiet Mind, Final Phase. As he crossed the collapsed yard, he saw something glinting in the dirt, a piece of metal shaped like a nameplate. He brushed it clean. It read simply, Vega, E11. He slipped it into his pocket. Then, from below, a whisper of air rose through the cracks, the sound of moving water. And beneath it, the rhythm returned. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. It seemed to be guiding him toward the sinkhole that once led to D Block. The descent. Klein lowered himself through a jagged opening. The air smelled of rust and salt. His flashlight beam cut through dripping pipes and concrete scars. The deeper he went, the warmer it became, as if the earth itself was breathing. He followed the tapping down a long tunnel until he reached a small chamber. The walls were blackened, the ceiling bowed. In the center lay the remains of a control console, its light still pulsing faintly. He placed the Quiet Mind drive into the port. The screen flared alive, bathing the room in pale blue. Marcus's face appeared, recorded years ago, eyes calm, voice steady. If you're watching this, the system won. They'll rebuild, rebrand, restart. But remember, silence only works when no one listens. Don't let them forget us. The video glitched, then merged with the live feed. Marcus's recorded eyes turned toward Klein as if seeing him through time. You listened? That's enough. Then the console shut down. The lights died. Only the tapping remained, soft now like a heartbeat fading to rest. The collapse of the green wall. Weeks later, the state announced the permanent decommissioning of Pelican Bay. The land was declared unsafe for construction. Documents recovered from the ruins proved decades of illegal isolation experiments. Hundreds of former inmates were exonerated or released. The phrase, "they can't bury truth," became a national movement, painted on courthouses, printed on shirts, whispered in prisons around the world. Agent Klein retired quietly. He never gave interviews. But every year on the date of the collapse, he returned to the coast and placed a single brown paper bag at the shoreline, just like the one Ramirez had thrown into Marcus's cell the night the lights first went out. He would stand there for hours, listening to the wind rush through the cliffs. Sometimes, when the tide was right, he swore he could hear it again. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. And he'd nod, whispering, I hear you, Marcus. They hear you now. The final echo. In 2025, a new maximum security prison opened in another state. Modern. Digital. No history. During the first night shift, a young guard sat alone in the control booth. The power flickered. From the intercom came a faint, rhythmic sound. Tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. He leaned forward, frowning. Hello? Control, did someone key the mic? Static answered, then a whisper. Still here. The guard froze. Outside, floodlights dimmed one by one, and the monitor screens filled with static. Across the bottom of every screen, words appeared in white text. You can't bury truth. The tapping began again, slow, calm, endless. And somewhere far below, under concrete and years of silence, Pelican Bay's heartbeat kept on. The truth that echoes. Voice-over tone softens, cinematic music builds. Pelican Bay was built to silence men. But its silence became the loudest sound of all. In the end, Marcus Vega didn't escape his prison. He became its conscience. And as long as walls are built to bury the truth, somewhere beneath them, someone will keep tapping back. Fade to black. White text on screen. In memory of every voice lost to the system. End credits roll.